Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad to have you with us for the Wednesday or the Thanksgiving Eve edition of the Three Martini Lunch. And as is our tradition here on the Three Martini Lunch, we take a break from the usual good, bad, and crazy martinis, largely because Jim and I are in the left lane on the way to our destinations for Thanksgiving, but also because there are things to be politically thankful for. And some of these are serious and some of these are a little more lighthearted. But as we get ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow, there was a lot that happened in politics this year. And so as we do each Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, what we're politically thankful for. So, Jim, what's your first one?
Well, actually, before we get started, Greg, a public service announcement to everyone who is listening in the northbound lane of I-95. Your left-hand blinker is on, and you're in the left lane, so please turn it off. Also, if you're in that lane and you're in front of me, please get out of my way. That's that concludes. All right. So I was thinking about, for 2024, what am I genuinely most thankful for? Besides the obvious, thank you, listeners, thank you, family, thank you, friends, thanks to God, thanks for health. And it's Thanksgiving and we have an election that's resolved. And it was not guaranteed that it was going to be that case. I think everybody, or a good portion of our listeners, are old enough to remember the 2000 election, where because of the recount in Florida and the fact that it came down to one state, it was still being resolved. For so much of this year, the polling indicated that there were 7 swing states and almost all of them were neck and neck. Every time it seemed like Trump was getting ahead, some poll would come along that had Harris ahead. And in the end, Trump won all 7. And as of this recording, he's ahead in the popular vote. Looks like he's going to stay ahead in the popular vote the whole time. Question about whether he's above or below 50%, but still the first popular vote win for Republicans since 2004. Republicans won the Senate, despite what Bob Casey wants us to believe. And Republicans won the House, although probably not by as much of a margin as we would like to have seen. So in the end, what we had for a long time, well, first of all, we have a resolved election. We have an election that was clear late on election night or into the wee hour mornings of Wednesday, which we did not necessarily think was going to happen. No post-election violence. Everybody put all that plywood up on the wall, on the windows in stores in Washington, D.C. for no good reason. And I think we should all have good reason to be thankful for that. And for a really long time, it has felt like we've been in a 50-50 nation. It has felt like, whenever one party would have a decent amount, they did come back, they'd lose it in the midterms. And it felt like the Senate was always very evenly split. As mentioned above, the House is still very evenly split. And it got hard to get things done. And it kind of felt like, why are these elections so close? Well, look, this was not a runaway landslide election. It was not 1984, but Trump won a very solid win. He won by more states and more electoral votes than he did back in 2016. He won, as I mentioned earlier, the popular vote. Republicans have not the biggest they left some winnable seats on the table in 2024, but they still have a solid Senate majority. And while Mike Johnson's going to say, "Oh my God, 222 seats, that's great. I've never had so many." I exaggerate slightly, but he's used to running a close House. So Republicans won, and they won and you're not hearing nearly as many stolen election. No one's claiming about Diebold machines. Stacey Abrams has not been heard of. I think she's still running the United Federation of Planets. So all in all, out of all the outcomes we could have possibly had from this election, I think we turned out pretty darn lucky. And for that, Greg, I'm very thankful.
Do you think if you had told Mike Johnson 2 years ago that not only he'd be the Speaker of the House, but he'd be going to UFC events with Jelly Roll and Kid Rock and RFK Jr. and Trump, of course?
He'd probably say, "I don't even eat Jelly Rolls. What do you mean?" By the way, when those two guys get together, is it literally rock and roll?
It is an amazing collaboration of people at this point. Just watching him hang out with that crew is absolutely fantastic. So my first thing to be very thankful for is that Kamala Harris will not be president and Tim Walz will not be vice president. Most of us didn't know that much about Tim Walz coming into this summer, except for the fact that he was governor during the disastrous Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd and how he completely botched that. Those who've paid closer attention to cultural issues know how radical he was on abortion and basically being a safe haven for trans teenagers who want to escape their parents and so forth. But in terms of Kamala Harris, she flopped in 2019. She didn't have to run in a primary. She was basically coronated largely after the Biden endorsement. And then we had this glitzy propaganda at the Democratic National Convention, how she went from this laughingstock to the greatest thing since, in the minds of Democrats, Barack Obama in 2008. And she got a surge out of that, seemed to be doing well. And ultimately, as you said, Jed, the turning point might well have been the vice presidential debate, which is certainly not the case in most years. And then ultimately she flailed because she focused entirely on trying to denigrate Trump, which everybody knows what they thought of Trump. She didn't really define herself well. She ducked the interviews. She didn't do well when she did the interviews. And I think her flip-flopping hurt her a lot. Most people who did know anything about her knew she was a San Francisco liberal. She had been declared the furthest left senator in the U.S. Senate going into the 2020 campaign, and then she tried to change a whole bunch of positions that nobody believed her on. And so the fact that she was not rewarded for that attempted sleight of hand is good, but also what we're not going to get for the next 4 years. If something happens to a conservative Supreme Court justice, there's not going to be a liberal replacing them. So that for at least for the next 4 years, you would think that there'll be a originalist-leaning majority on the Supreme Court, which is great. We're not going to get legislation for a national abortion ban for at least 2 more years, probably 4. We're not going to get court packing. We're not going to get the PRO Act, probably, and killing freelance workers. We're not going to get the Democratic left-wing attempt to federalize elections. The things we're avoiding, and there'll be a lot of things we like, obviously, about the Trump administration. There'll be some things that make us cringe, but ultimately, it would have been a list of horribles, especially if Kamala had gotten control of the House and the Senate to go with it, which was not out of the question, the Senate being the least likely, but it wasn't out of the question. And so the list of terrible things that won't happen for the next 4 years because she didn't win, very grateful for that. All right, Jim, 1 each in the books. What else are you politically thankful for this year?
So my next 2 are going to seem tongue-in-cheek and, oh, Jim's being funny, but trust me, there is a serious point in there. So my second thing that I am thankful for as we approach on Thanksgiving 2024, Greg, is for the tough-minded, really just razor-sharp inquiry from the journalist that probably had more influence over the outcome of the 2024 election than anybody else, that just absolutely crushed Kamala Harris when it mattered the most. And that, of course, is The View's Sunny Hostin.
Yes.
And half the listeners The View, as I like to say, is a current events show hosted by 5 women who don't follow current events and who don't choose to learn anything more about that. Sunny Hostin, on paper, is one of the worst of them. And yet, when Kamala Harris appeared on The View, Sunny Hostin asked the question that ended up, I don't want to say nuking her campaign. It's easy to overstate individual moments in the course of a campaign. But I think most people would say, looking back, this was a big moment. Yeah. And it ended up being a big part of the Trump campaign's messaging. Almost everybody could sense that it was an enormous self-inflicted wound at the time. Sunny Hostin, who is not, obviously, but very tongue-in-cheek, is not a conservative, who did not want to do any damage to the Harris campaign, asked the most basic question possible. If there was something she would have handled differently from Biden, right? Like right there, you're running for president, you've been vice president for 4 years. What would you do differently? And Harris came back with, there is not a thing that comes to mind. I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact. So at a time when right track, wrong track numbers were abysmal, at a time when Joe Biden's approval rating, really like post-Afghanistan, you and I have made this point, and I got grief from Susan Glasser of the New Yorker, and a whole bunch of people have made this argument, people overstate Afghanistan. No, Biden's approval rating dropped at Afghanistan and it never came back. We also probably should recognize that that's when inflation really accelerated. But basically, Biden's had an approval rating in the upper 30s, low 40s all the time. And that's, as Biden would say, that's chilly. So you don't want to be the status quo. You don't want to be America, I'm going to give you more of the same. And when lofted, never mind, actually, it wasn't even a softball. Sunny Hostin put the giant plastic ball on the tee and gave the plastic bat to Harris, gave her a practice swing and said, what do you want to do? And somehow, some way, Kamala Harris managed to strike out in T-ball by not saying, I couldn't think of anything that I would do differently than Biden. Not the message you want to do when your other campaign theme is turning the page. And so the semi-serious point in all this is that, ironically, first of all, it was very bad of the Harris campaign to not let her do interviews until 6 weeks after she'd gotten the nomination, or was, you get better by doing interviews. The more you don't do them, the more out of practice you get, and the more you get, the worse you get at thinking on your feet. Maybe Harris was never going to be good, but ironically, it's not the hostile interviews that get you. The hostile interviews, you're prepared. You kind of expect the hardball. You kind of expect the difficult questions. It's the friendly conversation with like-minded hosts where you really kind of let your guard down and say what you really think, and that's when you really get in trouble. So that is, so congratulations, The View, the single most influential moment of that entire program, going back all those years of Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg, and back when they had, real conservatives like Meghan McCain. The single most influential moment that show has ever had was driving a stake into the heart of the campaign of Kamala Harris. Well done, Sonny Hostin. I raise my glass to you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, my next one is basically jumping off of that point, but in a different way. And that's how completely ineffective the mainstream media was. They were lighting their hair on fire throughout 2024. They probably did want Trump to win the primary because, once again, just like 2016, they thought he would be easier to beat that way, whether it's for a diminishing Joe Biden at the time or later a Kamala Harris who wasn't clearly ready for prime time in a number of different ways. But, I mean, their bias was just seething and venomous and blatantly obvious at times. You had David Muir fact-checking during the debate on the crime statistics that didn't turn out to be correct. There was never a correction to that. The whole CBS interview with Kamala where they were splicing in answers from different areas and then not releasing transcripts. And CBS had a terrible campaign season. The moderators in the vice presidential debate were putting their thumb on the scale. And yet the American people, because I think of Freeform like X, because of podcasts, which amazingly, the 78-year-old candidate took more advantage of the emerging media than the barely 60-year-old candidate. I guess Barron deserves some credit for that, according to the Trump campaign. And we're thankful for that, of course, in podcast world, that people are getting their information from alternative sources. And so there's a real reckoning happening now in the mainstream media. I mean, they pretty much did everything they could from a bias perspective to sink Donald Trump. And if anything, it helped drive people away. When you look at their ratings now post-election and beyond, they've got another choice to make. They can either go back to doing, or somewhere closer to, actual journalism, tell the story, what do the facts show, instead of just playing favorites all the way along, or they can keep doing what they're doing and get smaller and smaller audiences. I fear they're going to do the latter because it's what they know to do, and they're just going to do what they did during the last 4 years of Trump being president and demonize everything he did. And oh my gosh, can you believe he would say such a thing on Twitter and whatever else it is? So I don't think they're going to learn their lesson. But the good news is, even if they don't learn their lesson, it doesn't have the impact it used to. And the American people have wised up to them, and that's a good thing.
We've been saying this for many years now, that if you look at the media world, there are a lot more conservative media than there used to be. And maybe my perspective is skewed. National Review's been around since 1955. But it's always been competing. Let's assume, as I said earlier, the electorate is roughly half-half. It's probably no longer quite so half-half. But that Republican, half-ish has always had a certain, only small segment of the media world playing to them, covering the issues that matter to them, talking about the way, all that kind of stuff. The Democrat half-ish has always had almost all the mainstream media, and then, of course, a huge chunk of left-of-center media, deliberately, even more explicitly left. I think you probably put MSNBC in that category. There's just more. There's more and more people fighting over a shrinking audience. And let's also point out, you and I have been doing this podcast for 14 years, which I'll pause for a moment so every listener can say,
thankful for that too.
14 years, Our podcast can no longer buy the kids' tickets at the movie theater. That's how old this show is. And just kind of this recognition that we've been complaining that, like, there's a whole audience out there that a chunk of the mainstream media doesn't want to talk to, that they find icky, that they just aren't, And the problem is they're divvying up that existing audience slimmer and slimmer. And we've been through the Trump era. We've been through COVID. We've been through Afghanistan, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This has not been a quiet, slow years. I think there's a certain amount of exhaustion that takes place in certain news consumers. If you stopped listening to us for a little bit after the election, we're glad you're back. Please come back if you did. But I totally get it if you needed a break. Greg and I sometimes go on vacations. It's all right. And I just kind of wonder if there's this belief, you saw this exhaustion in the resistance after Election Day, that all of their efforts had come to naught. And this question, why are we doing this the way? So it's good to see some rethinking. We'll see if this really takes root or whether they revert back to old habits. I think it's probably going to be the latter. But any sign towards the former is a good thing.
The old tactics simply aren't working. All right, Jim, last round. What are you most thankful for? Number 3.
Well, again, people are going to think I'm joking. People are going to think it's tongue-in-cheek, but there's a serious point in all this. A lot of people around the middle of the year really wanted Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor to retire, fearing for her health over the next 4 years and believing that it's possible that there wouldn't be a Democratic president or a Democratic Senate. But Sonia Sotomayor said, I am not retiring. I'm not going anywhere. Sonia Sotomayor, this bud's for you. I salute you for not giving in to the pressure, not giving in to the bullying. Yes, she has diabetes, but her mother lived to be a whole bunch of years, well into her 80s. Yes, she travels with a doctor. Look, I hope Sonia Sotomayor lives to be 100. And now that there's going to be a Republican president and a Republican Senate, I love Clarence Thomas. I love Samuel Alito. My attitude is Supreme Court justices should retire when they feel like it. Famously, Barack Obama had lunch with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think it was in 2013, saying, like, look, he kind of partly hinted, I don't know how the midterms are going to go, and I'm going to, I don't know who's going to be following me, so there may not be a chance to replace you with a like-minded judge. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not take the hint, shall we say. I'm not saying Clarence Thomas should leave in the next 2 years. I'm not saying that Samuel Alito should leave in the next 2 years. According to reporting, neither one has any intention to retire. But now that there's at least for the next 2 years, if they wish to retire, they can. And they can rest assured knowing that they aren't going to be replaced by a justice that sees the entire world the opposite the way they do. We'll see how the midterms turn out. We've seen lots of years where it started looking good at the beginning of the year and turned bad. But, looking at the map, it doesn't look all that easy for Democrats. And if it's a 53-47 one, Republicans have at least a little bit of leeway. So conceivably, that they could have any time in the next 4 years, if they feel like retiring, they could do so. And I said this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I thought there was something unseemly about the effort to push out Sonia Sotomayor. She just kind of gotten on. She really had not been on for a terribly long time. And the idea that, well, we've decided you're not healthy enough or you're too old, that we don't care that you're a wise Latina, as you were famously described in your confirmation hearings. Even my, my cold conservative heart could say there's something kind of mean about that. Something, She's earned her time her right to retire when she feels correct. She's not old by Supreme Court standards. But oh, by the way, yes, now it's possible. God forbid something does happen to her if she does decide to retire. Well, then she probably will be replaced by a judge who will be quite different in the thinking. Anyway, any way you want to slice it, there's probably going to be a strict constructionist, conservative, constitutionally, however you want to characterize it, justices that do not believe in the endless expansion of the state and they believe in individual rights, believe in the Constitution. That's going to be around for a very long time to come. And they're probably the Democrats who want to expand government will be facing that obstacle at the Supreme Court for many, many years to come. And that is an unironic, genuine reason to be thankful on this Thanksgiving.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yes, the fact that for the next 4 years, you would assume that we'll be in good shape in that department is a very, very reassuring thing. And as far as Thomas and Alito go, and I think John Roberts is he's pushing 70. I think he's about 50 when he got named to the court. So in terms of thinking about getting out, while Republicans have this majority for the next 2 years, I wouldn't be surprised if at least one of them did it. Given what Clarence Thomas went through back in 1991, I feel like he's Charlton Heston at the NRA convention. You're going to get this Supreme Court seat out of cold, dead hands, but you don't know when that's going to happen. And so if you want to make sure it ends up in the hands of conservatives, it's something you got to at least consider. I'm going to cheat a little bit and do a twofer. The first thing I'm going to say here doesn't require a lot of elaboration, but I think it needs to be said. And that's that I'm thankful that Donald Trump wasn't killed in Butler, Pennsylvania in July of this year. Regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, imagining what that would have done on the very eve of the Republican convention, the chaos that would have led to in a number of different ways, not just politically, but upheaval in the country. Quarter of an inch, basically. Turning his head to look at that chart may have really changed the course of American history in significant ways. And so that definitely needs to be said. The other thing is a little bit closer to home. Jim, you and I are about to enjoy our final year of the governorship of Glenn Youngkin. Virginia governors cannot run for re-election, so he is not on the ballot next year. But it's kind of a 4-year reprieve from insanity here in Virginia. Democrats had done very, very well in a lot of elections for a long time. We haven't elected a Republican U.S. senator since 2002, haven't elected a conservative one since 2000. And other than Bob McDonnell, Glenn Youngkin is the first Republican-elected governor since 1997. So I have a lot of Democrats in a lot of positions of authority in this Commonwealth. And so a number of things he did as soon as he got into office. He immediately empowered parents to make decisions about their kids and masking and got through all the COVID thing, stood up for parents in Loudoun County and with the whole trans issues going on, brought a lot of sanity back to our education system, and also brought back good government. The Democrats had control of at least one chamber of the legislature throughout his time as governor, so he didn't quite do as much economically as he wanted to. But apart from the legislature, he got to do some important things as well. And so this is not the sexy stuff that gets a lot of viral attention, but it's important stuff that makes people's lives easier. This is from a place called the Regulatory Review, and it says that in his first year in office, Governor Glenn Youngkin created an Office of Regulatory Management to lead regulatory modernization in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He tasked ORM with enhancing transparency and efficiency in both regulation and permitting, and he set the ambitious goals of reducing regulatory requirements by 25% and achieving a substantial shortening of permit processing times. 2 years later, Governor Youngkin's administration has achieved such extraordinary success that other states and reform-minded federal officials are sitting up and taking notice. And among the accomplishments in this process, ORM estimates that changes to date are saving Virginia citizens more than $1.2 billion per year. Some of it's by reducing words. Other times it's reducing requirements, like for becoming a barber or a cosmetologist. Used to be 1,500 hours of training before you can get your license. That's down to 1,000, which is still plenty of time to train and be good at what you do. Also, when it came to housing, the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development has cut more than $24,000 from the cost of constructing a new home by eliminating needlessly expensive requirements from its 2021 building code. There's also environmental streamlining going on. And so, again, it's not stuff you see every day, but it does make people's lives simpler. And ultimately, what you want government to do is not grow government and make your life more onerous. It's to get government out of your way. And Glenn Youngkin is doing that.
Greg, it's an excellent point, excellent research. And I'm just going to observe that when I gather around my Thanksgiving table with my family up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, I will pause. Everyone else will be saying how thankful they are for other. I will remind people to be thankful for the Virginia Office of Regulatory Management.
Thankful for
spare a moment for VORM this Thanksgiving. Only on podcasts like this do you get information like this, America.
That's right. That's right. Be thankful for the nerds who dig into that stuff and figure out ways to streamline things. So as Jim said at the outset, obviously we're extraordinarily thankful to God for many different things this year. We have extraordinary wives, extraordinary kids. We're thankful for you, our listeners, who have been with us every step of the way, not only through this incredibly up and down political year, but the last 14 years. And we have big plans for the new year, which we'll tell you about as we get closer to them. But we're doing well, and we have you and so many others to thank for that. And Jim, I'm always thankful for you. Still my absolute favorite part of every workday.
As Bart Scott famously said after one of those rare Jets wins over the Patriots, can't wait.
Exactly. So, Jim, happy Thanksgiving to you. We'll have a special tomorrow. It'll be our look back at the 2024 election, which we did a couple of weeks ago. And then on Friday, be around for our, again, tongue-in-cheek gifts for our Black Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. So be safe on the road. Have a wonderful time with your family. So much to be thankful for. He's Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends to do it as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you soon on the Three Martini Lunch.